The G98 in post-World War I, and he's also going to talk about gun control in Germany.
The first gun buyback program. A real one. Okay. Now, excuse me, but I have to sit. All right. In 1886, when the French developed the Lebel rifle, it was smokeless. Germany then went into a cram development. We got to get a smokeless repeating rifle. So they created a committee, a commission. And on that commission was Paul Mauser. But he was very unhappy with what they came out with. He didn't want his name attached to it in any way whatsoever. And that was the Commission 88 rifle. And some nations, though, that eventually got them, started calling them Mauser Model 88. Mauser wanted nothing to do with it. Now, Paul Mauser had lost an eye from an accident on a firing range. So he decided that he was going to build an over-engineered, smokeless bolt-action rifle. And in 1895, he comes out what we now call the 98 Mauser. All right, what did he do? First of all, he added a third lug, which is very important, third locking lug. Most guns at that time had either one or two lugs. His had three. He had vents in the bolt, so when the gas escaped, it would fly out. He had a little raised portion in the back of the bolt, so the gases would not fly into your eye and mess you up like it happened to him. Now, if you look at the rifle up there, you will see it is long. Why was it long? Because, well, you look at the Krag, you look at the Lee Medford, you look at the Mosin 91, all right? The original Italian Carcano 91. Nations felt you needed a long rifle. One reason was volley fire. They still felt there was a need to have a bunch of guys kneeling and a bunch of guys standing right behind them. And you needed to have the muzzle go past the face of the guy in front of you. Okay? The other thing was the Anglo-Boer War had sort of convinced them that long-range, accurate rifle shooting was an important soldier skill. So they wanted something that would give you great range. They also, remember, the machine gun was just coming in. They wanted something where you could get together with a bunch of guys, fire at 2,000 yards, and create a cone of fire that would come down on your enemy. Later on, that becomes the job of the machine gun. You set the machine gun, which traverse an elevation, you fire a whole bunch of bullets, they all come down and cover an area, and that was called a cone of fire. Now, the Gewehr 98 rear sight, the battle sight is 400 meters. Now, we know that most infantry combat occurs around 300 meters or less. So one of the disadvantages of the Gewehr was you'd be probably shooting over the heads of people that were attacking you at 200. Also, the roller coaster sight, or the Langvizier, it messed up your peripheral vision because of the way it's constructed. Right? So it was not a great sight. All right? Now, when they left the factory, the bolts and the receivers were left bright. And Germany had 4 armories: Amberg, Spandau, Erfurt, and Danzig. And they were to produce enough rifles for the German army if they went into a war. Now, of course, manpower is another thing. One of the things I want to show you is this chart that shows you the Imperial German organization. There was the Landsturm first band, volunteers, ages 17 to 19. At age 20, you would be conscripted if you were a German male. Not on your 20th birthday, but the year you turned 20. Okay? And usually in September. Why September? They wanted you to make sure you could help out with the harvest. And that was another problem for both Austria and other countries in the First World War. The generals did not want to start a war in the summer. They said, no, no, no. If we pull all these people off the farms, we're going to have a lot of problem with food for the rest of the year. So if you can, hold off until fall, okay? And the German Schlieffen Plan was also developed on that idea that you could win a war in about 3 or 4 months. The boys could come home for Christmas or before the leaves fall, and you wouldn't mess up your economy. Now, Germany had a real problem in that even though it was a leading industrial power in Europe, it depended heavily on imports of food. Austria-Hungary, on the other hand, was weak industrially, but it was very heavy into agriculture. All right? So those two powers had that problem. Okay, the active army. You were conscripted in September of your 20th birth year. And then you would serve 2 years if you were in the infantry, 3 years if you were cavalry or artillery. All right? Then, at age 22, you were put into the reserve. And you would get 2 weeks of training a year. All right? Then there was the Iraq's reserve. That's people who have been excused from active duty, ages 20 to 32, because of family, their value in the economy, or whatever. They were to be trained 3 times a year. I don't know how long. But they could be called up. But the real reserve was guys who were finished their active duty. Okay? Then there was the Landsturm second band, 38 to 45. I'm sorry, the Landwehr. Wartime duty only. They were to provide security. And also in occupied countries. All right? Below them was the Landsturm second band, 38 to 45. They were considered third-class infantry, wartime duty only. All right? Now, in August of 1914, they had 51 active divisions, 32 reserve. In November, they had 251 divisions. Okay? They were draining their manpower. And we're going to get into that because you need to understand that when Germany accepted those strict requirements from Versailles, they were beat. The upper echelons of the political system and the military knew it. They knew they were finished. The thing is, people at the lower level were still being fed propaganda. We're going to win the war. We occupy foreign territory. They don't occupy us. We still have the strength. We're going to win the war. Hindenburg, Ludendorff, the Kaiser's advisors, they knew that by spring of 1919 they were going to be crushed. They were going to be invaded and crushed. In November and October of 1918, Germany lost all its allies. The Ottoman Turks had thrown in the towel, the Bulgarians, the Austrian Hungarians. They were finished. To show you the impact, all right, this is the call-ups for each age year. Now, in 1914, they called up the usual 20-year-olds, September of 1914. And they went into combat. And there's a couple of German expressions for what happened. One is der Kinder mord Eeps. You know, children killed before Eeps. In most of the books that I've read, they call it the Massacre of the Innocents, which goes back to the Bible. The year Jesus was born, and Herod decided, I'll get rid of any king of the Jews. We'll just kill any kid that was born in that time period. So Germany actually lost a lot more people in the first months of the war. Because once they got into the trenches, yeah, there was a constant destruction of soldiers. But a big part of it was 1914. Because the Schlieffen Plan, its faults were, number one, it assumed it would take the Russians 6 to 8 weeks to mobilize. They do it in 4. 2, it assumed the Belgians would let them go through. The Belgians resisted. And that Austria would put pressure on the Russians to keep them off the German back, but the Austrians were on a crusade to destroy Serbia. They sent their troops south. They wanted to eliminate Serbia, period. Genocide. Of all the nations in World War I, Serbia suffered the most. 26% of its population was killed or wounded. All right? Because the Austrians just didn't care. They wanted to eliminate Serbia as a threat. And the reason the Austrians were doing so badly is, I think if they asked Alan Dulles, who's the world's greatest traitor? And, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget it. Right, he was an Austrian in charge of counterintelligence. And he was working for the Russians. And he gave, Rader, I think his name is, or Ryder, or something like that. He gave the Russians the entire war plans of the Austrian Empire. Now you would think that knowing that you caught this guy, and he'd probably given away everything, you change your plans. They kept the plans. The Serbs knew where the Austrians were going to come. And were able to, even though they were a smaller country, do extreme damage. Now, you notice in 1915, rather than wait till September, they're calling them up in April, in June. Again, the Germans planned on a short war. 6 months, maybe a year. Not happening. Then in 1916, they call up the 19-year-olds in August and November. 1917, 18-and-a-half-year-olds, January, May 1916. 1918, 18-year-olds, between September and January. 1919, the class of 1919, I'm sorry. Class of 1919 is being called up in January and February of 1917. In the last year of the war, they're calling up the 17-year-olds. 3 years early. All right? The class of 1920 is being called up in 1918. All right? Now, the German army knows it's finished. Like I said, Hindenburg knew, Ludendorff knew, and they're telling the king, the Kaiser, we can't protect you. We're not sure we have enough loyal troops to protect you in Berlin. The Navy is mutinying. Army units are forming into Soviets and other revolutionary groups. We don't know we have enough loyal troops to protect you while we're here in Belgium. Because in Belgium, at the place called the Spa, it was the German imperial headquarters for the war. So, when they get offered the Armistice terms, they're hoping that we will be generous. That's based on President Wilson. Because President Wilson wants peace without victory. He wants to treat them decent. The Italians don't want to treat them decent. The French don't want to treat them decent. The British definitely don't want to treat them different. Because they're going, you Americans came in late. Yeah, you paid in blood. We paid more in blood some days in one day than you have so far in this war. Okay? They've destroyed our lands. All right? You guys are safe. And you're making money. America is now gone from being a debtor nation to a creditor nation. The war is wonderful for the United States economy. Because while they're killing each other in Europe, we and the Japanese have stolen most of their overseas market. Because we're still producing. They're not. Now, on Armistice Day, all right, they're told they must withdraw to what's called the Armistice line, which means get out of Belgium and move back into Germany. Now, the weapon inventory of the German army, 6 million rifles. 1,500,000 they can't account for. They're lost. Okay? They turn in 1,690 to the Allies. They try to hold on to 250,000. They have 117,000 that are issued to the police. Now, in Germany, policemen carried rifles as well as handguns. Postal employees carried rifles. Railway employees carried rifles. All right? Now, what they do is, the Spandau Belgian Conference in July of 1920, the goal is to destroy all offensive capability by January 13th, 1921. Germany will not be able to hurt anybody. We're going to take their navy. We're going to burn all their airplanes. We're going to cut their army down to 100,000. We're going to take all their weapons, machine guns, artillery, whatever. They are not. We're going to make them close all 4 government arsenals. All right. We're going to totally disarm them. They're going to be totally weak. We'll be able to crush them anytime we want. And to make sure that Germany accepts, they keep up the blockade. Now, it is believed that Germany lost more civilians to starvation in World War I than to Allied bombing in World War II. Okay? They're a hurting nation. All right? Germany, okay, surrenders or destroys 30,000 artillery pieces, 10,000 mortars, 90,000 machine guns, and 3 million rifles. Now, it was interesting, as war booty, the United States got 19,000 Maxim machine guns. What are they going to do with them? Well, they send them over to Springfield Arsenal, and they're stored there. What are they going to do with them? The American Legion is formed. The VFW also exists. They go, can we have one? Yeah! And they start handing out Maxim machine guns. But they take out like one part, but there's no organized what part to take out. So if you had 3 VW posts, you could probably build one working Maxim machine gun. Okay? And I've run into 2 of those over the years that came out of VFW or American Legion posts. They were Maxim, the 0915 is it, or 0815?
0815.
0815. Okay? They're out there because we didn't need them, and they also gave them rifles, Gewehr 98s. All right? Now, Germany can keep 80,000 rifles and 20,000 carbines. Now, that's in 1920, okay? They're told You can keep them, but we want to make sure that they're the only ones. So what you have to do, and you'll see one of the guns here, you have to mark them 1920. It's a property mark. It's not a year of production or anything else. It's a property mark. If you were a German official and you had a gun without 1920 on it, the Inter-Allied Disarmament Commission, as far as they were concerned, the 1920 marked guns theoretically were all in a national registry. All right? Now, I've run into two 1920 guns. One of them is here, and the other one was a AZ model at Mount Bethel. They just add 1920. You can have the original manufacturing date, 1914, whatever, original arsenal markings, but it's got to have 1920 on it. Now, the German army is trying to figure out a way how to get around all this stuff. So one of the things they do is they create militias, and unofficially the Freikorps, which is like a veterans group. Now, in the collection of rifles I have up here, all right, up on top is your standard Gewehr 98 Spandau. Below it, you'll see burnt into the wood, EWB. There's about 600,000 guns marked EWB. It stands for the Bavarian Militia. And the Allies weren't being fooled. You got 600,000 men under arms, organized, training regularly, all armed with rifles, helmets, handguns. You'll find Lugers with EWB burnt into the wood. All right? So this rifle is very interesting. This rifle started out as an Imperial German Mauser, regular army issue. It ended up in the Bavarian Militia, EWB. When the Inter-Allied Disarmament Commission got their hands on it, they sent it to Poland. So it's got a Polish arsenal rework where they scrubbed the receiver. But it also has a cover on the front sight because it was captured by the Germans. The Germans gave it to their ally in the Second World War, the Romanians. The Romanians had them in storage in the 1990s. They then sold it to Century Arms International, and I got a phone call from Glenda Reuter, and it goes, Stan, we got some Polish long rifles in. You want them? I'll pick out the two best ones because some are pretty rough. So he picked this one and another one. About a week later, he died. Because we had the accident at the range. And a couple weeks later, I go into Sarko and I go, just out of curiosity, Glenn put two rifles aside for me in his office. They went inside, we found them, and they let me buy them right then and there. But this is one of them. So this gun went from Imperial Germany to the Bavarian Militia, to the Polish, to the Germans, to the Romanians, to Century Arms, to Sarko, and to me. Now, with all these guns floating around in Germany, the Inter-Allied Commission is not fooled. They're going, you got militias, you got lots and lots of guns out there. You need to get them back. Now, one argument that people make is, they go, government gun buyback program. The government didn't sell me that gun, so how can it be a buyback? Okay, I've got a hell of a lot of guns marked United States property. All right, so theoretically, it could be a buyback program. My first centerfire gun was an M1 carbine from the Directorate of Civilian Marksmanship, with a bill of sale and everything else. So, yeah, I got it from the government, from the federal government. But in Germany, there are guns floating all over the place. And that's going to be a problem, because every political group wants to get their hands on guns. There's going to be a civil war, basically, within Germany. And the items that each political group wants are rifles, Maxim machine guns, handguns, and helmets. The helmets were important. They were considered a sign of a warrior by then, the Stahlhelm. So you want Stahlhelms, handguns are useful, but you want rifles and you want water-cooled machine guns. Now, the Inter-Allied Commission tells the German government, now here they're the scapegoats. When everybody knew that it was falling apart, they didn't want to blame the Kaiser, they didn't want to blame the Prussians, so they palmed it off on the Social Democratic Party. They become the November criminals. They become the ones who signed the Armistice. They're the ones that are going to sign the Treaty of Versailles. And then, of course, Hitler and the others are going to say, they stabbed us in the back. It wasn't the Kaiser. It wasn't Hindenburg. They stabbed us in the back. And we're going to have to change things. Now, the gun buyback program. Okay? All right. The Inter-Allied Military Control Commission. They forced the German government, the Weimar, to pass the Disarming of the People Act. All right? For those of you who've been watching a lot of stuff on YouTube like me, the big term now for anti-gunners is the civilian disarmament movement. You know, we're going to take guns away from civilians. All right? The Disarming of the People Act. From September 15th, 1920 to November 1st, 1920. If you have an artillery piece, you can get $2,350 when I got this chart. A rifle is $1,000 for that, $2,350. I don't know how much, how much real value there was. You would get the full reward if you turned it in October 1st. After October 20th, you only get half the money. After that, just wouldn't be prosecuted. Now, look what was turned in. 18,000 machine guns, over 2 million rifles, 78,000 handguns, 85,000 grenades, and I really love the last part there, 932 flamethrowers and mortars. Guys brought back neat shit, no doubt about it. All right, and 46 million rounds of ammunition, and 1,680 submachine guns. Remember, submachine guns weren't that many anyway. Now, on the bottom of the page, I have hidden inventory. German army wasn't stupid. They knew that there might be a situation where the Allies would just walk in and try to crush them. So they started hiding guns across Germany. And in the 1930s, when Hitler and other groups wanted to come to power, they realized if you made friends with the army, they might tell you where these secret hidden inventories were and let you supply your SS or other people with rifles, machine guns, whatever. All right? But the goal was, we got to get rid of all these guns. Now, after 1920, if you were in Germany and they caught you with a gun, and it didn't have 1920 in it, you stole it from the Kaiser. Naughty, naughty, naughty. If you had a gun with 1920 on it, you stole it from our government, the present government, and we're only allowed to have so many. So what did the Germans do also? They found loopholes. One of them was, they were told they could not produce any more rifles. They started making Gewehrs with bent bolt handles and a side-mounted sling and saying, that's a carbine. It's still a Gewehr. Oh, no, it's got a bent bolt handle. Gewehrs have straight bolt handles. Carbines have bent bolt handles. And they were playing games like that. They were sending their arms designers into Switzerland to work on machine gun development. They were sending their naval architects to Holland to work on submarine design. They actually had a secret treaty with the Soviet Union where German officers would go on vacation to Russia and arrive at a camp where they dealt with naval aviation, armored vehicle development, and tactics. And that secret agreement benefited both powers. The Germans were getting training and trying out stuff. The Russians were learning about German technology. And it only stopped when Hitler came into power, and he goes, "What? We're sending people into the Soviet Union for military training?" So he stopped it. But for years, there was this secret agreement of training people. Now, all these rifles, the Allies had a lot of them. What are you going to do with them? We'll destroy them. They might be worth something. Yes, they were. Other nations, like Poland, said, we want all the 98 Mausers you can give us. Czechoslovakia, we'll take all the 98 Mausers you can give us. Yugoslavia, which at that time was not called Yugoslavia. I think it was called the Kingdom of the Croats and whatever. They wanted Mausers. Finland wanted Moisens. So a lot of these people, if they had Moisens, they sent them to Finland. Finland would send them German Mausers. But they wanted to be able to make their own. So after the war, they also reconditioned them. If you come up here later, this particular Spandau has a Polish FB for Fabryka Broni, which you'll find on the Vis pistol. This one here has the Polish arsenal mark. Now, during the war, a lot of guns got sent to Turkey. And in the 1990s, a lot of them came back into this country. And people were surprised that they were still in the original condition. The only difference is you'll see 3 crescent moons stamped into the receiver. Okay? The Turks like the Gewehr. As a matter of fact, in 1915, the entire production of Mauser Open-Door went to Turkey. They were a private company. Remember, Hamburg, Spandau, Erfurt, and Danzig were German arsenals. The other factories, Citizen Soul, Mauser, were private companies. They're not going to be shut down after the war. They're going to continue to make rifles, sometimes in 7mm or 7.65 for the South American market. So this one here, whenever I stack my Gewehrs up, it's about a ½ inch longer. That's because this is Turkish wood. The Turks cleaned, reconditioned, and kept issuing the Gewehr 98 all the way through to the 1950s and used it as a drill rifle and basic training rifle as late as the 1960s. Now, Czechoslovakia, see this is the one. Okay, the 1920 rifles. This is a 1920 rifle. The Langdazir sight was removed. They would blue the entire gun. Originally, remember, in the white receiver, in the white bolt. When they were restocked or recleaned or whatever and reissued, they would be blued and they were given the tangent sight. And that was the other argument for a carbine was, well, it doesn't have the long-range sights. All right? Now, below this, you can get a better look at it later, is a gun made, okay, after the war, 2 countries decided they still wanted Gewehrs, and they were going to make it themselves. That was Czechoslovakia and Poland. So this is a Czechoslovakian, what's called a 22/98. They made them for their own army. This one is one of theirs. They also made them for Iran or Persia. And the Persian ones, they got the Persian lion on here. And if you look at the sights, they're in Farsi. This one here is in our letters, we call Arabic. This one here is what was made for the Czechoslovakian army. It is unusually clean condition. And I bought it here from a collector who worked at Service Armament. And as guns came in, he had his minions who were unloading them bring him any that were in excellent condition. And he told me the story. He says, this went into Service Armament. He said, before it could go out on the floor, he said he looked it over, it was beautiful. He bought it from Charlie Steen, and he brought it to me. The other country that starts making Gewehrs is Poland, and that's this one here, Warszawa, 1924. Now, how could they make them? Easy. Danzig. Now, remember, Danzig was a German arsenal, and they started receiving requests from other countries. Can you make rifles for us? Yeah, we have the machinery. And the Inter-Allied Commission goes, Danzig is a free city, but it's really part of Germany. They could easily make guns for a resurgent German army. No, we're not going to let them do it. We're going to take their machinery and give it to the Poles. The Poles take it and set it up in Warsaw. And for 2 years, they make their own Gewehr. These are very rare because they were made to a great extent during the Bolshevik-Polish War. So they were rode hard and put away wet. And finding one in original condition is difficult. This particular one has a rear sight from a 98K. So the Germans got their hands on it by the time World War II rolled along. This particular gun is interesting. It belonged to a Mauser collector, John Wall, out of New York. And when they wrote the book on Mauser military rifles, they had trouble finding a Warsaw rifle. And he had one. So they photographed the rifle, and that's the one that's in the book. So this rifle is not like one of the ones in the book. This is the rifle that's in the book. Okay? And I've gone on the internet, and every now and then somebody has one with a Langvizier sight. But they are always beat. The bores are rusty. They're going to tell you it's in fair to poor condition. This one here is still shootable. I suspect John Wall had the right contacts. And when these guns came out of Albania or Romania, he probably had first dibs, in the warehouse. He was probably well known to the owners and so forth. So this is probably the best condition post-war Gewehr you're going to find. The Iranians still like the long rifle. And during Desert Storm, I don't know if any of you remember Baghdad Bob, their propaganda minister.
It was great.
He had a picture of a farmer with a Gewehr, and he claimed he had shot down an American helicopter. Okay? Well, I know from aviation people, they refer to it as the golden BB. That is, if you're in a helicopter with all the sophisticated stuff, there's still that 1 in a million chance that a bullet will hit something so vital that it'll screw up your helicopter. So they were claiming that he had used his, while he was out farming, he saw the American helicopter, fired around and took it out. All right? By the 1920s, most countries didn't want Gewehrs. Everybody was going to what the Americans and the British had done earlier, the shorter rifle. Poland was still buying Gewehrs, fixing them up, issuing them to its troops. They were finding out the market was drying up. Theoretically, nobody was making Gewehrs after 1924. So Poland decided they would do it. And in 1935, they decided they would make Gewehrs, which they called the 98A. The problem was stocks. Yeah, all the metal parts were not a problem. You have to dry out the wood for over a year for a rifle stock. So they had to wait until they got cut enough rifle stocks, and then they started producing. So the bottom gun here is the last of the large production of Gewehr 98s. And it's the 98A made at the Radom Arsenal in Poland. Now, during World War II, Remington ran into the same problem of walnut stocks. You have to wait a whole year before they're seasoned out. They decided to use ovens and speed up the process to like 2 or 3 months. But that was the limitation, was the stocks. And Poland, for its frontline infantry, Poland means land of the plains, you know, flat land. They're more like Oklahoma, they're not like West Virginia, okay? So these are the last production Gewehrs, are the Radom 98As. All right? They're still out there. There's a collector at Forks of Delaware. And he showed me his picture of his basement. He must have at least 60 Gewehrs. And I had one that he didn't have. So he traded me a Polish rifle. Well, we're both happy, okay? But he's been collecting for years and years. He lives in Hamburg, I believe. And he's invited me to go to his house. I just didn't get a chance. But he specializes in the Gewehr 98. So I hope I've given you some information on what happened with the rifle after the war, and the history of its development, the cloning, as I call it. And are there any questions? Try to help you guys out. Any questions? Boy, that's quick and easy.
How many of those would have made it into frontline service in World War II?
Not many for the Germans, but the Romanians did. The Germans considered the Gewehrs, you know, as a matter of fact, in the 1930s, the SS was given Gewehrs, and the German army had 98Ks. And if you ever see the Nazi guards in front of the Reichstag, their black suit, the white slings, they got Gewehrs. All right? But that was the idea, is they get the old stuff. They're not that important, okay? The Wehrmacht has first dibs on 98Ks. So, outside of ceremonial use, and again, they unloaded a lot of guns on the Romanians, and Glenn de Ruyter told me, I think it was back in 1995, he got sent by Sarko to Albania, when Albania was trying to get rid of all the Albanians and the Romanians learned they got a lot of old German iron that can get them American gold, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 94 or 95. I was before Jeff's house, I was standing in West Virginia. And in his warehouse, he had just gotten 40,000 Mauser rifles off the Turkish Air Force.
Right.
World War I, World War II captured stuff. And there were some Gewehr 98s in there. I was surprised. I wasn't interested at the time, but there were quite a few that were good collectibles. He was selling them to...
Some ended up in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And I remember Bob McKenna used to tell me, he used to drive to Virginia, the E.O. Hunter warehouse.
Yeah.
And he could hand pick, you know, the guns he wanted to buy. And there was a good number of Gewehrs there. So, you know.
I know Fort Jet was selling it to Edelman's, and they were sporterizing it. They came in and bought 400 or 500 for $15 a piece. And then they sporterized them and sold them. Yeah.
Glenn said he was taken into these caves in Albania. And he said, stacks and stacks of Mausers. Buckets of Lugers. Okay? And what they did is, after the war, they issued them out and used them for their own police. But as they transitioned to being a Warsaw Pact nation, they didn't need this. And of course, they don't have gun shows in, behind the Iron Curtain. So they would just stack them somewhere until they could figure out what they were ever going to do with them. Now, in Russia, they had stacks and stacks of German Mausers that they refurbished right away and stocked up as either as foreign aid or for a war reserve. But what happened under Nikita Khrushchev is he said, if we are going to support wars of national liberation, we don't give our communist friends World War II crap. We'll give them top of the line AKs so they have a success, so they have a chance of success. All right? You know, we'll give them some of the old stuff. When I was in Fort Hood, Texas, one guy called me up and, you know, found out I was interested in guns. He goes, I've got a German sniper rifle that I picked up in Vietnam and I shot the guy who was holding it. Okay? So I go to his house. It was a 98K with no scope on it or anything else. And it's a lot of surface pitting, but they had been recoded or parkerized or whatever. But it was just a German 98K. So, you know, some of them were sent to communist groups.
The French were using them a lot too.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, the French were using a lot of German equipment in the French Foreign Legion because they had a lot of former SS and Wehrmacht members of the Foreign Legion. And those are the guns they were familiar with. And they had lots of them. You know, the ammunition and stockpiles of Mauser 98s. So they got around. But like I said, Gewehr production really stopped in 1924 by Czechoslovakia and Poland, and then started up by Poland in 1936, but within 3 years that stopped. And to the best of my knowledge, and if anybody knows better, fine, I'd rather be embarrassed than pass on bad information. Nobody made Gewehrs after that. There was no need for a long-range rifle. Now, I mentioned the sights are set, the battle sight is set at 400 meters. The only exception is rifles that were sent to the German colonies in Africa. They set their sights at 200 because they felt that that's what they needed in the jungles or whatever. But in Europe, your battle sight was 400. You couldn't go lower than that. You'd have to use Kentucky
Elevation.
Kentucky elevation or devalue, drop it down. And again, a lot of the fighting in the First World War was maybe 100 meters apart, trenches. So if you were armed with a Gewehr and your sights are set at 400, chances are a lot of your shots went high. Yeah.
In the Spanish-American War, didn't the Spanish use 95 Mausers and 7mm?
Yes. And they proved superior to the Krag. The Spanish Modelo, I think it's Model 93, the Spanish Modelo.
Yeah.
The Boers had the 95s.
They had the Chilean Mauser.
Huh?
The Boers had the 95s, the Chilean Mauser.
Yeah. The Boers had the Model 95. Again, the 7mm was a flat shooting cartridge. That was the other thing. If you can get a cartridge with high enough velocity, there isn't much rise. So if your sights are set for 100, maybe they're still good at 400. But if you got like, when we get to rifle muskets, if you have a Springfield musket 1861 and you think your target is 500 yards away and he's really 300 yards away, they're flying over his head. And that was another problem during the Civil War, was range estimation. Guys weren't taught range estimation, and they still believe in volley fire. You know, okay, we'll line up, fire, everybody fire. But a lot of mini balls missed because they range estimation and the use of the sights. That's why when the National Rifle Association was created by Union officers, it was because of the high expenditure of ammunition and few casualties.